And I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Darren Schreck and Mary Fleece Dunkel. We are political science professors at Moraine Valley, and over the last several months, since July, we've been kind of sharing our views on the developments of the 2024 presidential election. Today is November 15th, so we're just about 10 days past the election. And so we wanted to I think this is our 11th event of the semester or over the last 5 months, talking about the election. We kind of wanted to have a recap and kind of takeaways that we have of the election. And our views, of course, are not we don't represent Moraine Valley in our views. It's kind of been a way for us as friends and colleagues to kind of journal our thoughts on the developments throughout this past 5 months. So it's been fun. I appreciate both of you sharing your thoughts. So with that, I thought maybe Darren, you could start us off on some of your takeaways from the election.
I'd be happy to, and thanks for putting this together once again. It's always fun working with the two of you, and I'm going to try my very, very best to be political science today, but it's sort of a stretch at times. So was I surprised by the result? I'm not necessarily surprised by the result of the election where Harris lost. I think I'm surprised by the fact of how great the difference was between Trump and Harris in terms of the states, that the 7 swing states went to Trump almost without a problem. So that I was more surprised about than anything else. The one thing that I was going to mention just to start off with is that, as the kids say nowadays, there's the FAFO, and I won't say what the FA part is, but we're like at the finding out stage. And I think we were always wondering what the next 4 years was going to be. And I think we're seeing it in the first week after the election, where the results came out from Dearborn, Michigan, that Donald Trump won Dearborn. And that's a big deal because it's a heavily Arab American city in Michigan. And Trump won with about 47%, Harris 28%, and 18% voted for Stein. And many people have said that, Trump is playing them. And really, this was a way of getting back at the Democrats for ignoring them for so many years, or at least during these 4 years when Biden was president. So what happens now in the finding out stage is that Mike Huckabee, the former Arizona governor and Fox News host, and I think Newsmax host, and late night commercial grifter, is now going to be the ambassador to Israel, and he has said over time that there's no such thing as a Palestinian person. So that is the finding out stage for many people who are Arab American in this country. The election was determined by 401ks and egg prices. So people are now sitting back and they're happy with the fact that they did not elect somebody of color or who was a female for president of the United States, but at least their egg prices supposedly are going to go down. And yes, it was an election based on the economy and the interpretation of immigration policy, same immigration policies that have been in place in this country for many, many years, not just in the last 4 years. But what we're also seeing too is that the Donald Trump administration, in his executive branch, in his cabinet, is going to be run by people who are anti-facts, anti-intellectualism, anti-vaxxers, dog killers, grifters, anti-Palestinian supporters, nutcases, weirdos, weekend Fox News contributors, and Elon Musk. So we're at the stage now where we're kind of like, hold on tight, folks. This is going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah, Darren.
That's tough to follow up, Mary. Go ahead.
Honest to God. Oh, Darren just reminded me of that line in the Dove Wears Prada where Stanley teaches like gird your loins, and that's what this feels like. So I was going to start off with something positive because the ancient Greeks used to always say that out of something bad must come something good. But I'm going to be also honest and say I'm having a hard time getting there. So I'm trying to find silver lining in certain things, but I just had written down some thoughts. I woke up at 4 a.m. I was telling Kevin and Darren earlier that I just was sort of avoiding things for the first few days. I just couldn't really look at it because I think intellectually, I knew that there was a possibility, given how close it was, that, and I remember reading one of the predictions that it might be whoever wins might take all 7 swing states, right? I guess maybe in my mind, even though I knew it was a possibility, I was just really hoping it was going to be the other way. But Kevin, you did pretty much call it in our last meeting together. So 2016 kind of felt like a lot of shock and a lot of fear. 2024 feels more like resignation and dread. Because it was almost like I feel like I had this dull sense. It's almost like when somebody dies, this may sound melodramatic, when somebody dies and you kind of walk around in this sense of like sort of this dull, like your senses are all dulled. And that's kind of how I felt. But the sun did come up the next day, right? I mean, it still will, but it's hard to see, given everything that Darren pointed out. It's hard to see that happening. I'm kind of reeling from a multitude of things, and I've written a bunch of stuff down, but I'm reeling about the fact that even though there is evidence that the economy seems to be improving, right? That inflation has gone down quite a bit, and it seems like many things, Donald Trump will end up taking credit for an economy that already was kind of on the upswing, perhaps. It's still that message was lost. Now, is that strictly because we are in 2 different ecosystems? Because when you look at Biden's record, this is the thing I had a hard time understanding. Why is it that a president who has been actually more progressive since pretty much LBJ and Roosevelt, and done things like lowering the price of insulin for people and introducing some student loan forgiveness and going really a lot more left than people ever expected he was going to do, right? Why didn't that message resonate with people? And I can't help but feel that we're in these we talk about bubbles, right? But obviously that message was not getting through. So how do we convey that message? How does that message get taken to voters? That's the part that I'm still struggling. Does it mean going on more things like podcasts? And I mean, mainstream media just seems like it's another era. The 3 of us grew up together where you watched NBC, ABC, or CBS, and they were relatively reporting the same things. And now I mention things to my students, and they're just looking at me like, I've never even heard that. What are you talking about? So how do we break that bubble? How do we get through? And that's the part that I don't know what that is. I don't know how to do that. So I can stop there. I've got more to say, but I'll stop there at that, so Kevin, so you can jump in.
Well, this is hard for all of us because there's so much like I want to say to each of your comments, but I should probably start with my own kind of reaction. But I definitely want to follow up on points that both of you raised. I mean, I did expect Trump to win. Like both of you, I didn't expect all 7 swing states to necessarily go his way, but I definitely did not predict him to win in 2016. And even on, if you go back to like January 7th, 2021, I would have never expected Trump to be the Republican Party nominee, let alone win not only the Electoral College, but the popular vote. Yeah, I do think Darren raises a good point about kind of the boundaries of this second Trump presidency. I think there's definitely, Mary, you and I had an event this past spring on how there's going to be fewer restraints on a second Trump term, in part because the Republicans in the Senate are different. I mean, some of the institutionalists like John McCain or Ben Sasse or others are no longer in the. McCain passed away, but or have retired. Like people have left Congress, you're more likely to challenge Trump, and of course he has, just been able to bring in kind of a new MAGA version of House of Representatives and Senate Republican senators. So, and then also the people he's going to appoint. And Darren already mentioned several of those appointees. So it's just going to be a different type of administration. And then, of course, he has now he has selected a third of the Supreme Court. So I think that's going to be something interesting to watch, especially some of these nominees like Gaetz and so forth of how the Senate treats, are they going to confirm all of his appointees? Is he going to use a recess? It's something to keep in mind. I do think one of the reasons I predicted that Trump would win is just the the political environment, the gravity, if you will, the kind of the laws of politics. In 2024, we've seen incumbents get beat globally. We've had elections in almost every continent in the world, and the incumbent party has performed anywhere to -20 to like -3. And actually, the Democrats did pretty well in terms of how they performed in terms of the incumbent party. And partly this is because, as Darren pointed out, inflation is a huge part of that. It's been an issue globally. I think that migration is a global issue. People are upset about that. Trump won Stark County, Texas, the country's most heavily Latino county on the U.S.-Mexico border. He won that by 16 points. He lost that same county in 2016 by 60 points. So it's a 76-point swing. There's anger and divisions over wars in Ukraine and Gaza. I think there's still people who are upset about the way that the United States pulled out of Afghanistan. I think there's lingering anger over COVID era policies. And Biden was a really unpopular, extremely unpopular incumbent. When we had our first event, we made a case that he should have dropped out. He should have dropped out a long time ago. Harris was tethered to Biden as a vice president, and she had a few opportunities, including on The View, of kind of explaining what she would do differently than Biden, and she said she couldn't think of anything. So I think she was just really caught up in the anti-incumbency views that is a global phenomenon. Despite all this, Democrats did better than almost every incumbent political party around the world. And according to my math, at current calculations, it looks like Democrats are only about 239,000 votes from winning combined the states of Pennsylvania. They lost by 129,000, Wisconsin 30,000, Michigan 80,000. And so if those number of votes had switched, or Democrats were able to gain those number of votes in those three states, then Harris would have won the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote. So despite this all, Democrats, could have done much worse. And it's, what was that, like 4 of the 5 Senate races that were in swing states, Democrats won. We basically have the same makeup of the U.S. House of Representatives. It looks like we'll have a very similar number of a small Republican majority like we did previous to this election. Mike, I'm going to stop there because I could keep going on and on, but there's a lot of other topics to kind of get to. So just kind of maybe an opportunity for either of you to kind of take this in a different direction, or comments that you have so far.
I'll just mention one thing about it's something, and I'm not a big Bernie fan. I mean, I make fun of him in class, calling him 127-year-old Bernie Sanders. The thing that he says the most is that the Democrats have lost the connection with the working class. And we could say it's the middle working class. We could say it's the middle class whatsoever. And he does have a point there. And I do it anecdotally, at least from the perspective of, I think the Democrats lost probably their most pro-labor, left of center senator in that institution, and that's Sherrod Brown. The fact that he has always been on the side of the left and the working man and the working woman in this country and in the state of Ohio, and he lost. Which goes to show, I think, how far the Democrats have gotten away from their bread and butter. And I think, for me, my belief is that they've leaned into what Bernie Sanders has said. They've leaned to too much of identity politics, and it's hurt them. They tried to get that fringe voter on board with their coalition, but while they were getting those fringes on board with them, they lost their core. And the Democrats, this was their year to win back the House, and they didn't do that. And like you said, Kevin, that's going to be almost the way it was before we started off in this election cycle. The same makeup. So Democrats have a lot of work to do, a lot of work. I think the The Republican Party has realigned itself as a working class party. And we know that when a political party grabs onto something and they're realigning, the other party has to grab onto something else to show that there's a difference between the two. And I don't know what the Democrats can join in on that would give them a majority in the next few election cycles. I think they have a lot of trouble awaiting them in the next 2, 4, 6 years.
I see a really important theme here that you've each raised, and so I think we should spend quite a bit of time on that. Um, Mary, did I cut you off? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the decline in the working class, and I just kind of want to follow up. Mary had pointed out that Biden in many ways was in that vein of when LBJ and FDR and kind of being this new Democrat who had delivered in a lot of ways. So I just want to cite a few of the things that Biden did, because I do think that Bernie Sanders and many Democrats have made this claim that Democrats, have kind of lost their way with the working class. And like, as Darren pointed out, like, it's probably not policy oriented, because Democrats passed a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package. They made a $369 billion investment in the Inflation Reduction Act for climate change. They signed a CHIPS and Science Act to strengthen manufacturing and innovation. They provided college debt relief to people who make less than $125,000 a year. They cut child poverty significantly when they had those direct checks to families during the American Rescue Plan. And then in like 1 year alone, they created 6.6 million jobs, more than any president in U.S. history. And despite all that, I wanted to cite some data from Rui Teixeira. This is from from November 14th, 2024. He made this. So from yesterday, he had this post about the rising American electorate. So he used Catalyst data from 2012, which is the best retrospective data that we have. He compared it to the demographic group estimates from the AP Votecast, which is currently the best kind of estimates that we have for 2024 election data until the 2024 Catalyst data comes available. I could cite a bunch of different stats, but I just want to focus on the working class. Overall, if you define the working class as non-college, in 2012, Obama won that group by, when you look at all races, ethnicities, Obama won that group by 3 points. Harris lost that same group by 13%. So that's a 16% decline. White working class, Obama lost by 20 points. Harris lost by 30. This is a 10-point decline. And then non-white working class, Obama won by 67 points. Harris only won by 32 points, and that's a 35-point decline. And, there seems to be a disconnect. Like, Biden and Democrats delivered presumably what working class people might want with many of those type of big government investments. And so I wanted to share an article that I actually read today in the Wall Street Journal. And it's many people have made these claims that the new division isn't as much race as much as it is class. Trump had won. Apparently, it looks like about maybe 1 out of every 4 Black males votes, perhaps a majority of Latino males. And so this article actually highlights a few people in Chicago. This Aaron Waters, a Black unionized construction worker, said race is not an issue for me. He voted for Biden and Obama. He said it's about what you can do for the U.S. whole as a U.S. citizen. And then the one that really stood out to me in this article is that you've got this woman who's literally working on this project that is part of Joe Biden's infrastructure plan, right? I mean, she's a Black female, and her name is Nicole Wiltz. And she's a 52-year-old Black unionized worker. and she usually votes for Democrats, but was dismayed to see how many resources the government has devoted to the migrant crisis when many longtime Chicagoans felt homeless. And so, we could, there's many other issues that I think, and Mary and I had an event, I'll cite that again back in the spring. There's been a lot of work on this. Rudy Teixeira and John Judas have written a book on where have all the Democrats gone. And I would just want to set this up for Mary, because I think you set up a good point. There could be like the message or the messenger, and it could be the medium, how people are receiving their information. And so a couple different directions we could take this. Are the Democrats like just off track on social issues, where, whether it be on immigration, whether it be on, being too leftist on issues dealing with race, ethnicity. The most used ad by the Trump campaign overwhelmingly was dealing with transgender issues. It was the #1 ad by far. And according to Kamala Harris's super PAC Future Forward, when it was the Kamala is for they, them, and Trump is for you, those ads, they found that it shifted the race 2.7% towards Trump for people who watched that ad. And so anyway, your thoughts on maybe what the Democrats could do differently, or what the Republicans are doing really well with either messages, with issues, with the way that they are communicating with voters.
I think there's a variety of things going on. One of the points I had written down to talk about was about reality, right? Like, I've always believed in an objective reality, but it seems like I'm questioning that now. Does that even exist, right? Because it seems like we're living in multiple realities, and no matter what you throw at people, statistics and facts and whatever, they're hearing what they want to hear because they're hearing it in their own particular bubble, and they're not hearing anything else. As far as even Kamala Harris being in the identity politics issue that Darren raised, because I've heard that a lot, but whenever Kamala Harris was actually approached about those topics, she deferred them. She didn't refer to herself when they made the comment about race. She's like, and just kind of move forward. But it almost seems like, again, the perception is the reality. She's of that party, therefore she must think the same way then. She is for they, them. And I don't know how much they did in terms of ads against Trump to combat that they, them ad, because I know that was a particularly useful one. But I think it's just overall people's perception of reality. Like, one of the things that Ezra Klein talked about, Kevin, did you see that one where I listened to his podcast. I've been listening to it more and more, but he was on Pod Save America talking to Jon Favreau, and he was talking about just the overall feeling of things feeling lawless, whether they're lawless or not. You mentioned like the migrant crisis, right? Or going downtown and this perception that the city is a dangerous place. I was asking my students, like, do your parents ever worry about you for sociology? Do they ever worry about you going downtown? They're like, yes. Like, almost all of them raise their hands that their parents, just the idea of being in the city, somehow you're going to get shot. And I was saying to them, there are about 3 million people by and large that live around the city of Chicago. And when you think about what doesn't happen, there's a lot that doesn't happen, right? But you only hear about the things that do happen. When it bleeds, it leads. So I think, again, that all plays a role, but it is their perception of events. And I think it goes back to, no matter what we're talking about, it goes back to what kind of information people are getting and where they're getting it from. And when you have a constant drumbeat of right-wing media that's been going on, the right-wing media ecosystem that has been so powerful, going back to Rush Limbaugh, right? And no matter what, it's on message. They're repeating the same things again and again and again. And you hear people repeating them, whether they're true or not. He's going to make the prices of eggs go down, even if the president has no control over that. And I talked about that with my students, and a lot of them, they seem to understand it. But it's almost like it kind of goes back to what we heard about in 2016 with Trump. I know he's saying those things, but the overall things that he makes me feel safer. Even though there's a lot of evidence that there's some scary stuff coming down. A couple things I wrote down along with that. So I just read in the Wall Street Journal today, I don't know if either of you saw this, that Warren Buffett is the Oracle of Omaha, right? That he is hoarding some money. He's putting money away. And that, he seems to be the one that people kind of follow. That what he does tends to, it tends to precipitate when something bad is coming. He did this before the housing crisis as well. You're hearing about Trump loyalists kind of putting their money offshore because they're making plans to leave because they're worried about what's going to be coming after them, with the Department of Justice being weaponized as it appears it's going to be. Again, it's just this overall anxiety, and I'm not trying to cut away from the working class argument, because I think that all of these things are going to play a role, right? If the economy does go in the tank, and if the tariffs that Trump puts into place are going to have that ripple pour effect on the economy, will people then attribute it to Trump? Or will they still believe whatever they're hearing on, whether it's on Fox or on Newsmax or whatever, that you're going to blame somebody else? So I just worry that, like, how do you combat that? How do you come up? I mean, liberals have their own podcasts, right? But do their podcasts get listened to? No, we're perceived as the party of elites. That we know that we're talking about certain things that's not what people are. But the policies that are coming out of Democrats, though, are policies that help people. I was just reading about, I think that there's a way that Democrats can kind of combat that. And I think that it does go back to the Bernie thing. We have to kind of get back to this idea of policies that help working class people. Another point that Ezra Klein made was talking about Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado, and how the policies that he does. He talks about, I don't care who I'm going to work with. I'm going to work with whoever it is to get something done if it's going to help people save money in the long run. And I still think that there are plenty of politicians who do that. We just don't hear about them. Your Katie Porters and your people like that. We don't hear from them. Why don't we hear from them? How do you get that voice magnified further? There was another point I was going to make, and now I'm having a brain burp here. But yeah, another scary point here. This is from CNBC today. That our deficit, we talked, Kevin, you've done things on the deficit, but that it is 120% based on the GDP, right? And even if Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk come in with the Department of Government Efficiency and they start making all these cuts to the deficit and whatever, it's going to have a very negligible impact. What is that going to mean for Medicare? What is that going to mean for Social Security? All of these things are going to have an impact. So Democrats do have an opportunity, but they've got to fix the branding. And that's the part where I keep coming back to, like, how do you get through to people? Does that mean, like, you have constant, I was saying to this, I think, to you before, Kevin, and forgive me if I'm going on too long here. I feel like there needs to be this return, almost, if it's a possibility, how Social Security was advertised on one page, a government check to you every month from the time that you turn 65, one page explaining what it means. We need stuff like that, I think, again, to make things, to simplify them and make them understandable to the voters that are not like us, that don't read things constantly, that are not news junkies, that are not political junkies. They don't care, right? But you have it, like, so maybe you have posters everywhere, even if they get torn down. If you make TikTok videos constantly, like, there's got to be an investment, I think, in every White House that's Democratic, or in every major within the party itself, of connecting more with people and telling them what they're doing. And just repeating it on a loop again and again and again. How else do you combat that? That's the part I just keep getting stuck there. No matter what we're talking about, I just keep getting stuck at. If no one's going to hear it, then what does it matter what we're saying? I don't mean we, but I mean what is being done, I should say, to help voters.
Thank you. Yeah. Darren?
It doesn't help that the Democrats, I'm going along with what Mary's saying, it doesn't help that you still hear from Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer about the direction the Democratic Party needs to go in. This was supposed to be the election where Hakeem Jeffries was going to be brought up to be Speaker of the House, and the Democrats blew it. And I don't know if it's branding. I don't know if there's people within the party that kneecaps one another, so that they make sure that somebody doesn't ascend. Maybe I'm just anti-boomer at this standpoint, that here you have an opportunity where you have a candidate, I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican, who represents Gen X, and you got to wait another 4 years for somebody who looks or sounds or has a feeling of where you come from. The Democrats, like you said, Mary, have a branding problem. And going back to what you said about the they, them versus you, This reminds me of like in 1988, where it was Republicans defined Michael Dukakis as like this anti-military guy, and they did nothing to fight back on it. And when they did, they looked so weak fighting back on it. And I don't know if the Democrats could have fought back on that, they, them, you, because in their mind, going back to what I was saying before, they were trying to get that 1 or 2% of the voting population on board with them. So they didn't want to lose that 1 or 2%, and they forgot that there was like a big chunk of their population, a big chunk of their voting block that was going elsewhere at the same time. So they're losing 20 or 30 points, but they're gaining 1 or 2. It's still a net loss. So they're trying to showing what going back to what Kevin posted, the Democrats are trying to grapple with, we made our bones on the working class and identity politics, and we want to stick with identity politics. Well, it's a losing scenario. It's a losing scenario. And also, too, Kevin, you mentioned, I wanted to put this in there too. From that article, they're citing people from Chicago. This is how poorly Harris did. Biden received in Cook County 74% of the vote, Trump 24. This time around, she lost 5% of that support. It went down to 69%, and Trump gained 4. He went up to 28, almost 29%.
And that was throughout the United States. You look at
Yeah.
it, I mean, it was pretty much, the last I saw was like 90% of all counties went towards, moved toward a bigger gain for Republicans. They gained an advantage. So much I want to follow up on. It's hard to know where to begin. A lot of great points you both raised. I want to start by saying, I think the Democrats are the party of elites, and perception versus is reality, as Mary pointed out. And I think that for better or for worse, the Democrats, it seems like the groups that they're doing best with are people above $100,000 of income and college educated, especially those with advanced degrees. And I wonder if the working class just doesn't see themselves in the Democratic Party. And sometimes, I think it was David Axelrod called the Democrats maybe the party of being of smarty pants party, and that maybe people feel judged and canceled and by the kind of professoriate, if you will, amongst the Democratic Party. And then I wanted to connect that to kind of the media ecosystem that Mary was talking about. A couple things. I think we'd be remiss to not recognize, I think Trump is a master of communication, especially of utilizing the medium of the day. He has, over the course of the last, decade or so, bypassed the traditional gatekeepers of the modern information ecosystem. Originally, Twitter, now X, Fox News, Newsmax, One America News, Truth Social, and then podcasts. Joe Rogan was brought up, but Theo Vaughn and the Nelk Boys and Logan Paul and Bussin' with the Boys. And, Trump's youngest son, Barron, I think he's around 18. He seems to maybe be well connected of knowing maybe what is some of the mediums to go on to try to connect it to young men. And I want to share a couple things now, just to kind of show where I got my sources from. I came across this today. It looks like, according to the Edison podcast metrics, that Trump was able to reach about 4 times as many people on average per week on podcasts. Harris went on several great podcasts, but it was dwarfed by the number of people who Trump was able to reach. And this site brings up that, of course, a lot of this is the 46 million or whatever it was who watched Trump on Rogan. And it was apparently that Harris was willing to go on Rogan, but there was concern that, again, the left would criticize Harris for, going on a medium like that and kind of validating the views and of everything Rogan's ever said. So they're kind of like self-censoring, if you will, of the mediums that they go on. This is another one I came across today that I thought was, am I sharing my screen? Can you see this? Darren, Mary?
We see the
Oh,
only
sure
thing
can.
one thing just
Yeah,
hit on,
okay.
yeah, the podcast election. He talked to more
Yeah.
people.
So the other one is just how. So this is Data for Progress, and people who were paying close attention to political news. I think people like us, again, people with higher education. Are generally more attuned to political news. And amongst those, Harris did well with those who were following the news closely. And then the people who weren't following the news closely at all, Trump was able to win by about 19%. And then I wanted to just kind of bring up, this is one article that's talking about it. There's a lot of others, but so this is in the Atlantic from a couple days ago. And basically, what I wanted to just say about this is like it's one thing, like Democrats should probably be, like Mary, you brought up at the beginning. Most people, especially younger people, they're not getting their news from the nightly news or picking up their daily newspaper, and so we need Democrats would need to reach people where they are, but then they also need to be authentic, and whether that's being able to speak freely and naturally, and not to say that Harris or any Democrat isn't able to do this. It just seems like they're so worried about saying something that could be offensive to some group. And I was watching in class like a 5-minute clip of when Harris was interviewed on Fox News, and so many of my students were just like, wow, what was that? Like, why couldn't she answer the question? Or why is she being so vague and generic? And, I think at some point, you notice when Trump does these 3-hour podcasts on Rogan, like, he speaks freely. And I think one thing that Democrats haven't grappled with for the past 10 years is he's speaking maybe from the gut, or maybe from, if you're just thinking about the average working class American, and what they want to hear is maybe authenticity. And I know we all feel the same way about egg prices, how, it's really awful that it's gone up 3 times as much in the last 4 or 5 years. But I think there is a certain amount of like understanding the pain points of average everyday Americans, and how the cost of living is really high for them. And how can you speak to their fears, anxieties about taking care of themselves and their family in this modern economy, that's kind of left them behind. And even if it isn't always left them behind on like, there's a lot of data to show that the United States has been the best economy in the world in terms of GDP growth, in terms of unemployment, in terms of stock market, like Darren mentioned, but of being able to have people actually feel, that they're doing better. So yeah, I've spoken for longer than I should, so I'll leave it there. So turn it back over to you two.
No, you summed it up very well. I mean, you know, perception is reality, and you know, going back to what I said before, I was looking up some data here just to give you an idea of people gravitating towards something that might be against their best interest. In Ohio, for example, when Sherrod Brown ran 6 years ago, he won 16 counties, and this time around, he only won 8. And he lost many of the counties around the Cleveland area, like Youngstown, for example. And that's like blue collar of blue collar. And he still lost that county, I believe. So, you know, like we go back to it before, there's a branding issue. And I think whoever, and I'm going to skip ahead. I told my students not to go down this path, but if you're going to have a presidential candidate in 4 years, there's like a lesson to be learned here. Some people wondered why a Shapiro or a Kelly or a Bashir or a Whitmer or a Cooper didn't want to be the vice presidential nominee. And I think in some cases they might have known that this was going to be an uphill battle, that if any of them were on this ticket, they would be tarnished and they wouldn't be able to run 4 years from now. So they all kind of like are above the fray. Like a Tim Walz, I understand, and I think they didn't allow Tim Walz to speak the way he was speaking before he became the nominee. I think there was always there was just too much going on the Democratic side where they were kind of putting everybody in a framework, and they told them not to go outside of that framework. On the Republican side, it's like you said, Kevin, like Trump just speaks from the gut and just says whatever he wants, and people go along with it. What if Harris just would have said, when I was in college, I did X, Y, and Z, and who gives a blankety blank? And people would have been like, hey, she's speaking like me because when I'm in college, I did the same thing. But the problem is that keep going back to it. It's just the same old, and they kind of like kneecap each other to make sure that, well, we're just going to keep it the way it is, and the public will gravitate towards us. Well, this was the election to like get the public to gravitate towards you, and they didn't do it. So I don't know what's going to in 2 years. And some people say, well, wait till the next election for the midterms, and I'm like, you're going to like rely on 20% of the voting population to make a decision on which direction the country is going to go in, when you had 60%, and this was the direction that they wanted to go in. So you're going to like rely on low voter turnout to decide what's going to be the direction of the country?
Right, right. Well, I think listening to both of you, I was writing a couple of things down. Bill Clinton was always the person that was able to explain things, and I would say even better than Barack Obama, breaking down, because Barack Obama could be very cerebral and just be talking, and they had to kind of bring it back in. But he was very good at just explaining something in terms that people could understand, just taking complicated topics and explaining them in normal language. And I think there's a line that exists that's between listening to what voters want, but then not getting, you can't be everything to everybody, right? So your message has got to be, to a degree, kind of simplified. It's like what we're going to try to do for you. There's also a gap between, going back to Kevin's point about the idea of whether it's speaking authentically or not being afraid to say something that's wrong. Like you mentioned Tim Walz too, Darren. He got, I think, some kind of proverbially slapped around for saying something incorrectly, right? He said that, like, oh yeah, I was told I can't say that anymore. People make mistakes and people say things that are wrong all the time. There's a gap between life that exists on social media, on X or whatever, and then real life that we all live in. And I think that's also something that's lost a lot, I think, to Democrats. And a lot of these people, the politicals, are the ones that are speaking on these podcasts, they're always constantly connected, and they're on social media all the time. Not everybody is. So I think that we have to stop worrying about that so much. I think that there is this level of like trying to be yourself. There's a reason why Katie Porter connected with people, Congresswoman from California, because she would talk about what it's like to have drive a van of kids around and have the van break down and have to get it fixed, and how much it costs, and those kinds of messages. And those would go viral on social media. They would resonate with people because she was talking about everyday ordinary things and what it's like to be a mom with kids and be tired and whatever. So I do think that, but part of it, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit too. Donald Trump can get away with these things and say these things. He's got that Teflon element that Ronald Reagan had. I think for someone like a Hillary Clinton, who was not comfortable really being her authentic self in front of other people and had to be so guarded because she was always being judged. And even for Kamala Harris, sometimes it feels like there's a different bar, right? For things that they say and do. Do you know how many people have said to me that didn't, and even women too. And these are people that are not as known, that don't follow politics as much, but things like, well, do you know how she got her first job? And then Sean shared with me, my husband shared with me a story that happened at work, where somebody came in, somebody that does not work there, but somebody that was wearing a Joe and the Ho Must Go shirt. And then he responded, when somebody questioned him about it, he responded with about, well, I can say whatever I want to now. If I want to say, and he says the N-word, full word, then I can. So, I mean, again, I don't know that I think there is kind of a gap between the two sometimes, between what something that Donald Trump can say versus what maybe other people perceive they can say. But I do also maintain, though, that they have to be more authentic, because the authenticity does mean something. So,
yeah, I unfortunately got like 2 minutes here before my room at the library is going to expire here. I think just to reiterate that point, you brought up Sherrod Brown earlier, Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And the last show and tell that I wanted to do was about the Senate map, and just how most states have a delegation that is of the same party. So all these states that are red, both senators are Republicans, and these states that are blue, both delegations or both senators are Democrat. And there's only 3 states right now that have a mixed delegation of a Democrat and Republican. And it's just like the Senate map is not favorable for Democrats if they are not appealing to voters in the Midwest and South. And so, something to keep in mind is how Democrats can field candidates that can authentically connect to voters in the South and Midwest. And at least for the Midwest, like Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, North Dakota, Montana, these were all states that Democrats held not long ago, within the last 20 years. So I wish we had more time. There's so much more we can talk about, especially the consequences and maybe implications of a second Trump term. Thank you both for about a dozen events over the last 5 months, and look forward to future discussions on political topics in the next year. So thank you both.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.